right, so let's get started. I'm Tim Howell. I'm the co-founder of RW Elephant. Before we start, I did want to point something out about Martin's presentation earlier. Martin was a little bit too humble in his presentation. What he didn't mention is that he just sort of appeared on the Cappuccino scene a couple of years ago, and it seemed like in about a half an hour he'd completely rewritten the compiler. And with that came an absolutely huge performance boost. Some things were probably twice as fast as they had been before that weekend that he put in. So just want to make sure that everybody recognizes the tremendous work that Martin's done. So this presentation is going to be a little bit less technical than what we've seen so far. What I'm going to do is demo a little bit more of what our application does, and then kind of talk about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, things that I would do differently if I were starting over with Cappuccino. So an introduction to RW Elephant. RW Elephant is a company that my wife and I created in 2010. The way that this started was that I, a long time ago, used to be a computer programmer, then thought, you know, I should switch careers. I'm kind of tired of doing this. I should do something else. So I thought, well, what would be easy? I decided to go to medical school. Not a quick path, by the way. But so I thought, you know, I'm going to leave IT behind, leave programming behind, completely switch careers. I'm going to do something where I have more time with people. Because a really good day as a computer programmer meant 8 or 9 hours in front of the computer. That was great, but I also felt like I'm not interacting with people enough. So I give up programming. I go back to school. Halfway through medical school, my wife had just gotten a job working for a company that did party rentals. So rentals primarily for weddings and other special events. And the company that she worked for did what are called niche party rentals. So it's very specialized kinds of things. Antiques, stuff that you might find at a flea market, just stuff that the regular party rental shops aren't doing. And because of this, she started at this company, and one of the first things that she did was try and find some software to run the business. There really wasn't anything that was available that was affordable. So we had just gotten back from a trip, and she turned to me and she said, hey, can you help me make like a really complicated, you know, Excel spreadsheet to manage the business? And that's not a good question to ask for a couple of reasons. One is that my wife is much better at Excel than I am. And so when she's asking for a complicated Excel spreadsheet, I know immediately that doesn't mean Excel, that means some kind of a database application. Second issue is because, you know, I should have realized at the time, can you help me make this thing really quickly? That's never going to be a small project. So what we did is we started out, and I said, okay, well, you know, spreadsheet's probably not going to work. Let's try FileMaker. You can get FileMaker Pro. We can get a book. You can actually put the application together yourself within a couple of days. That didn't work. She spent a couple of days with FileMaker Pro. Then I started to spend some time with FileMaker Pro, and I was, you know, banging my head on the wall within a few days. Well, meanwhile, I'd heard a couple of years previous to this about Cappuccino, and I'd always wanted to do something with Cappuccino. You know, like I said, I was a computer programmer, but I've never been a designer. And so the issue for me and the applications that I developed previously was always the interface. And I'd seen these demos of Atlas, and I thought, well, this is brain dead easy. You know, I can build an interface if I can just drag and drop everything. And this will give me a chance to learn Cappuccino. So I told her, okay, I'll build the application if we have an explicit agreement with your employer that we own the software so that we can sell it to other businesses if we want. This will be kind of our, you know, our get-rich-quick scheme. So 2010, we took a road trip. Took 5 weeks, and we started Fullerton, California, is all the way there on the left. And we drove across the entire country. Actually went into Canada briefly to spend an afternoon at Niagara Falls. Drove across the country, stayed in a cabin in Lake Sunapee, New Hampshire, which is way up there in the corner. Did a few, you know, kind of little day trips out from there, and then drove down the more southern route. So to give you guys a sense of the scale of this is about 3,000 miles from the starting place to the upper right-hand corner. Then a bunch of day trips in between, and then 3,000 miles back. So that's where the first version of this application was born. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but basically I learned Cappuccino on the way out, created this massive, complicated application, and then came back and we released it, sort of. So what is RW Elephant? RW Elephant is a software as a service inventory management system for niche rental businesses. Software as a service, it's a multi-tenant application. Currently, we're in use by more than 100 companies around the world. Most of our business is in the US, but we also have several users in the UK, Australia, a couple in Mexico, Canada, and so on. We did have a company in Dubai sign up once. They only lasted about 2 days. But we've sort of had these kind of random pockets of interest where it's like, how did they hear about us? You know, when we were going over the localization stuff earlier, I thought, that's fantastic. I've got to learn that now that we're starting to do more of these other international clients. That'll be really useful for us. But it's basically a system that allows companies to manage their inventory. So niche rental businesses, what are these companies? I'm going to show you 3 examples of what some of the products might be that these companies would rent. So Patina is one of our companies in New York. So they have all of these different sofas, for example, that they would rent. A company might have multiple of one item, or they might have a bunch of individual items. A lot of the companies will have maybe, they have all of these sofas that are similar, but individual pieces, and then maybe they'll have 50 of a certain kind of chair and 200 of another kind of a chair. So it's both one-offs and collections of things. And then this is how the pieces might be used at somebody's event. So they'd rent a whole bunch of these different items, and either they would arrange them or a designer would arrange them to kind of set up like what's called a vignette. So maybe at your wedding you want to have a little, a lot of guys in the US now want to do a bourbon bar at their wedding or a cigar bar. And so they would set up this little vignette where it's kind of a grouping where people can spend time together and make these different areas at an event. So it's very popular in the US. Loot is another one of our companies. This is a company in Texas. Similar idea. They've got some things where they have multiples of one item, but they also have lots of individual pieces. And then here's what their products might look set up. And then one more, Unearthed Vintage, is in Florida. And they also have lots of tables and chairs and so on. And here's what that might look like. There's a setup for a wedding there where they've got, basically probably 100 of pretty similar chairs. So the software, I'm going to go through a quick demo here that's slides. Then we'll do the live demo because I think that shows a little bit more of the power of Cappuccino and what the software can do. Here's our login page. The software allows you to create and manage items. So within the Cappuccino interface, you can define categories for your items. You can create new items within the category. Edit details about the item, what is the name, how much should it rent for, and so on. Put tags on the items. So these are free form. This uses the token field in Cappuccino, so you can create tags as you go. Just to describe an item, maybe you'd say beach, chair, wood, whatever kind of descriptive terms you would want. So that's how you build inventory. And again, we'll go through a real demo in a few minutes. Then it allows you to create and manage rental orders. So the inventory is no good if you can't do anything with it. So RW first allows you to build all of this inventory. Then you can go in and you create orders. I recognize that the resolution, because of the projector, makes it pretty difficult to read. But on the left-hand side, there's a table view showing the different orders. On the right-hand side is a detail view showing an individual order. And this is just basic contact information for the order. Who's the client, who's the coordinator, what is the date of the event, and so on. And then this is where the fun starts. So also on the right-hand side, if you sort of near the top, there was that, you can see that we've got a tab view. And the tab that we started on was left-hand side, which is the kind of the contact, almost like an event header, it's the details. But in the middle, this is where you can add line items to an event. This is where we use drag and drop. So there's a table view on the bottom left-hand corner that shows you all of the inventory that would be available for that event. So this is to make sure that you don't double book anything. And then using drag and drop, you just pull orders from the left-hand side onto the right-hand side to build the order. Then when the order is built, there's a button that says Invoice PDF. You click that button. We create a PDF of the invoice that shows event date, pricing, all of the details, and it becomes the contract for the company. And this is just an example showing what the PDF would look like. So there's the detail and then another page that shows all of the photos of the items that have been selected. And then orders are no good if you can't collect money on them. So, actually, when we get into the real demo, I'm going to switch it to the higher res version so that we can see what's going on. But if you can't collect money, no good. So we also manage all the payments. So our users can record payments, either cash, check, or so on, or they can actually use our integrated credit card processing, which is through Stripe. And so they can process payments directly in RW, either through the Cappuccino interface or through a link that we provide to an online payment page where a client can go in, insert their credit card information, and pay for an order and confirm it that way. Then finally, that's great. You've made your orders, you've collected money, but now you need to have some business intelligence to be able to decide, which of your items are useful, which ones should we probably get out of the inventory, things like that. So we provide a whole bunch of different reports. There's a reporting screen where you can select from all of these different canned reports and then select a date range, and it instantly generates an Excel file for you showing you inventory profitability, which of your pieces are being used, who are your most profitable clients, and so on. So here's an example just showing some of the data from one of those reports. So let me step away from this now, from the keynote, and get into actually showing the application. Okay, so the application starts out, and I know I'd promised to switch it to a higher res display. Yeah, I better switch that. The problem is if I switch the display, then it's going to not show as much on the screen, but we'll see if it works. Easier to read? Good. Okay, hopefully the layout looks okay. So you log in, it shows you basically a dashboard. A couple things that we've done. We have help that's integrated throughout the application. So this is a use of both the CP popover and then also a web view. So we have these help buttons on every page. When somebody first creates their account, the help content for each page is automatically opened. Then when they, this content is actually just being served from our web server in a web view, which makes it really easy. I don't have to do any application updates if there's changes to the help content. And then if they decide to close the content, that's fine. We remember that. So the next time that user logs in, they don't need to, they don't have that pop up every single time. Here's the item screen that we talked about. So categories over here on the left. I could show, for example, all categories, and it's going to just list then in my items column all of the items. We use filter fields. These do use CP predicate under the hood. So you can search for, say, Babar, and it'll find you everything that matches Babar in some form. And then here's the item detail. Unfortunately, this doesn't show very well on the 800 by 600 screen. But this is where you would edit detail about the item. In just a minute, I'm going to go back to the display that shows kind of more content so that we can see everything there. Okay. So yeah, the display is a little bit too wide to show on 800 by 600. But basically, here's where you can edit the item detail. If you said, you know what, this Babar red couch is currently, it's probably listed in couches. But you know what, I've decided the Babar red couch is actually more appropriately listed under chairs. You can do that. You just drag it in, and it drops it into the new category. Okay. Now these categories, the way that these are listed aren't random, and they're not alphabetical, you've probably noticed. What these are is this is an ordered list stored in the database. The way that we use this is that we also do provide a public gallery where our tenants can show their customers the products that they have to offer. And the ordering of that gallery is all based on how things are ordered in RW Elephant. And the question is, well, how do you change the order? Simple. Drag and drop. Okay? And the same thing for the items within an individual category. You want to change the order, you just drag and drop. So this is the kind of thing that, could I have created a drag and drop system? Probably, with a lot of work. But with Cappuccino, I was able to do this in about an hour and a half. And that's kind of been a theme for me with Cappuccino is that there's all this power built into it. So I'm able to bring in features that would have taken weeks to develop if I had to start from scratch. I can try things out. If they don't pan out, you know, pretty early on in the product, I'd come up with a feature. I'd show it to my wife, and she's like, you know what? Great, but that's not useful. I'd be like, okay, well, that's fine because it only took me an hour. I didn't spend 3 weeks developing it. So that's been a huge benefit to us with Cappuccino. One other thing that I want to show on the inventory section, I'm not going to go into all the details, but one thing that I do kind of like is to show another way that we use table views. We have something called related items. So the concept here is that obviously 2 couches are going to be related items, but you know how I showed those vignettes where, you know, there was a couch and there was an area rug and there might be a coffee table, all these different pieces that people would frequently group together. This is a perfect use for related items. So what we allow you to do in the inventory is you can edit things and you can arbitrarily say this other piece should be considered a related item. This piece should be considered a related item. The way that that works is you go to the related items tab, and if you're in the edit mode, then you can choose any of these different items. Say, okay, you know what, I think red linen napkins should be a related item. And unfortunately that one doesn't have an image, but I think the Dumbo chair also should be a related item. And so you can very quickly conceptually group things. And then this also would show up in people's public gallery where they can have a, you know, maybe if you're looking at the detail for a particular item, you can say, show me items like this, or show me other things I might be interested in, and that's how this is powered. Okay? Now we'll go into orders. I'm gonna not save that. So here's the order section. Again, we use a table view on the left. This is where it would list all of the orders. We use some filtering again with CP predicate, so you can say I only want to see, you know, I don't want to see any wish list type orders. So you click that tick box, and that changes the predicates. That instantly the wish list disappears. Or I don't want to see proposals. I only want to see confirmed orders. So you can filter that way, and then you can also filter just by typing text up in the top. And obviously nothing's going to match there, but it shows you the search is instant. What we're doing here behind the scenes is that anytime you change one of these filters, it's just constructing a new CP predicate, which is then applied to the array controller that manages that list. We've gone through a few different methods on how to do this, and when the CP predicate editor came out, I thought, well, that's incredible. So first I implemented all of this with the CP predicate editor, but I realized that interface is too complicated for what my users are doing. But again, it was nothing wasted because all I had to do was delete the CP predicate editor from my view, and the code underneath, which uses CP predicates, still works and actually provides a lot of power so that even though I'm not displaying the editor, I still have all of that, the logic that comes with the CP predicates. So super powerful stuff. Okay, then now that I'm on an order, let's actually go to a proposal because that'll be a little bit more fun. This is already a confirmed order. No fun there, but let's go to a proposal. And so to edit the order, to edit the line items, I can go to the line items tab, click edit order. We replace the views on the left with new table views that show all items. You can show just the couches, however you want to do it. And in the list, it shows you what's available. And unfortunately, because of the resolution on the screen, it's pretty hard to see, but this would show for the linens, these red linen napkins, there's 1,000 of 1,000 available. So now I want to add those to my order. I'm just going to pull that onto the order. You know what, I didn't really want it at the bottom. Let's put that up at the top. Drag it to wherever I want it. Okay. The other thing that's kind of cool that we do here is that we have something called percentage discounts or percentage fees. The way these work is these are, for within the items, you can set, you know, the name lives with the inventory item. You can't edit that here, but a note, you can edit the note. If you wanted to have a line item note, these are really bright. You can do that. The quantity is going to default to however many quantity is available, and then you can change it. We don't need 1,000. We only need 50 of them. Then it's going to recalculate the price for you, and stick all that on there. we have something called discounts. And we have two different kinds of discounts. We have flat rate discounts, which basically just act like negative line items. Then we have something that we call percentage discounts. And the way that these work is that it allows you to set a percentage and say, I want this percentage to apply only to certain items. And in order to make the interface as simple as possible for our end users, what we've done is we've said everything above a percentage discount has that discount applied to it. Anything below it doesn't. So if you see, the red linen napkins are up here at the top, quantity 50, unit price of 50 cents, line item price would be $25. How come the adjusted line item price is 0? Well, the reason is that we've got this 100% off industry discount down here. But if I drag this now, put it at the bottom, that discount no longer applies, so now it's showing the $25. Again, this is the sort of thing that was super powerful and super easy to come up with because we already had drag and drop that came along with Cappuccino. And the functionality, we were already using drag and drop to be able to order things on an invoice, so we got this essentially for free, okay? And then, you finish the order. This order is currently for the client Jane Doe. We're going to say the coordinator is going to be Tim Howell. I'm not in there, which is a shock. So I'm going to choose Add New Contact. And this uses a window where I can say, okay, I'm a person. My name is Tim Howell. I'm not going to fill out all of this other information, but company is a token field, basically. I'm going to add it to RW built-in contacts. We also do have the ability to integrate with HighRise, which is a CRM system. Basic information, I'm not going to fill anything else out. I'm going to save it. And now I've been created in the system as a contact. And a feature that I wanted to show with this is that this is a special token field that we actually had Alexander develop for us a few years ago because Cappuccino didn't really have a widget that was sort of like a token with autocomplete, but that would allow us to lock it down so you could only have one in a field. So this is a very simple subclass of CP token field. I think it's about 12 lines of code probably, but 12 very good lines. And I was really, I'd bang my head against the wall trying to figure out how to solve this. We hire Alexander, in like 3 days he gives me one file and an image, and I'm like, are you kidding me? That's perfect. And so simple. But what this allows is see that caret, this shows the power of CP token fields. They can have an optional menu. So you can assign a menu to a token just like you can in Cocoa. And in our case, the way that we use that is to say edit contact. So that's how I can get in and edit the contact. Okay? All right, so now let's save the order. Let's create an invoice PDF. And there you go. It's the PDF that shows all the basic information about the event, all of the line items, pricing information, and then a page at the end that will show you photos of all of the items. And then reports I'm going to skip. I should have shown on the items. One other thing I forgot to point out was that on the detail, you can assign photos. Here's the photo library. Obviously, this photo doesn't match, but here we go. See, there's multiple photos on here, so I can say, you know what? I actually don't like this image anymore. I'm going to remove it. Now I could add a photo, a different photo back onto there just by dragging and dropping from the photo library onto that spot. Now that photo has been assigned to the item. We use here a combination of both Cappuccino, native drag and drop, and then also the browser drag and drop. The reason for that is that anything that you're dragging within the application, we use Cappuccino drag and drop. But to actually get images into the application, there used to be a library called Deep Drop Upload. And so that's how we get the images in. Since then, there's been a new framework called Cup, which makes drag and drop uploads a lot easier. We've stuck with Deep Drop Upload for a number of reasons, most of which it already works. Whereas to rewrite it for Cup would take some work, and it's a feature that works. That didn't seem to me to be a reason to do that, to change it. Any questions about that?
How do you protect against malingering on the client side, because you do the price calculation on the client every time?
Sort of. So some initial pricing information is done on the client side, just that the table can update, but then everything's validated on the server. All of the discounts, for example, are applied on the server. Everything, all of the real calculations are done on the server. Yeah. The other issue, though, is that yeah, we should still protect against it, but if somebody's changing the prices, they're the company that's selling it anyways. So if they want to change the price, okay, it's up to them. You know, and if they want to do that by trying to get around my code, more power to them. I don't let them, but ultimately it's not that big a risk because it's their pricing at the end of the day. One other thing I wanted to show is the account section. And the reason for this is this kind of shows how you can use sort of, you know, if there's not an interface element within Cappuccino that works perfectly for what you need, how you can use some other elements with some creative thinking to get around it. So what we used to do for the account settings is we had a tab view. Tab views are great for about 3 tabs or 4 tabs maybe. Beyond that, they become very difficult to work with because the amount of space allocated for the header in the tab is just too small, and you can't really get the content in there. And then it becomes really difficult also to try and manage more complicated views within the content view that a tab view provides. So what we did a major redesign of the application about a year ago, completely redid the interface. And one of the things was that we stripped out the account section, which had grown pretty unwieldy over the years. And we redid it by building the split view, where we have a split view, the table view on the left that shows all of the different settings that you might need to change in the account. Then on the right side, we just have basically a big empty content view. And depending on what's chosen in the table here, we swap out what we display in the view on the right. And so this took something where, you know, it used to be that anytime I would need to add fields to the account section, I would put it off as much as I could because I was so panicked about how is that going to change the layout, where am I going to fit things, how am I going to manage an extra tab. Now it's like no big deal because all I do is create a new view within Interface Builder, do my layout on that view knowing that it's not going to negatively affect anything else. And then I update the delegate and the data source that manage the table view so that it adds that additional line item. This also means that if I have experimental features that I want to test, I can do that just by having it built in and by having the data source and the production version not return any information about those rows that I don't want to be accessible to people. Okay, I'm going to jump back into the presentation now. So how we use Cappuccino and RW Elephant. I think I can skip a fair amount of this because we ended up going through the demo, which was always what I wanted to do, but wanted to have the videos as a backup just in case. Basic architecture. So the system consists of about 12,000 lines of Cappuccino code, or Objective-J, an interface that's completely done, probably should say 80% completely, and we'll get to that too, within Interface Builder or Xcode. The server is about 24,000 lines of Perl. All of the interaction between the client and server is done through, I have a single file that kind of is the master communication class. And so it handles all of the requests back and forth, but basically all the requests are serialized as JSON, sent over XML HTTP request, or the Cappuccino abstraction of that. And then the response is returned as JSON as well, which has made it really easy to work. And then on the PDF creation, this is done server-side using primarily Perl with about 50 lines of Java and then a Java library. So what actually happens here is that we have, on the server side, we have a script that runs, and when a request for an invoice comes in, it queries the database and it uses that information to build a bunch of SVG files. Basically, we have a bunch of templates that are SVGs, and it fills those in with the actual content from the database. And then we have a command line utility that it calls that's written in Java for historical reasons that converts that SVG into a PDF. I looked at a whole bunch of different PDF conversion tools. There's so many of them. Some of them are lightning fast, and they work great, except they don't use any fonts that you specify.
or everything looks perfect, but they rasterize all the text so you can no longer search it, or any number of things. We finally found Apache FOP. It used to be called Apache Batik, and it's basically an SVG rasterizer, and one of the things it can do is PDFs. And I don't write Java, so I went on freelancer.com and I found somebody. I think I paid $50 for somebody to write me. It's like 10 lines of Java that is basically a command line utility to import and call FOP and then convert the SVGs. So that's how we do that. Cappuccino features we use. I already pointed out lots of different types of views and controls. Toolbar, you can probably see that the theme that we use isn't quite Aristo. It's almost Aristo 2, but we changed a number of the colors so that they kind of match our branding better. A few things that we did. This is a little bit hard to see on this resolution, but in the toolbar, you can see that there's the look for all of the icons that are not selected. It's kind of the grayed out version. Then we have bright white for the one that is selected. And the default Cappuccino toolbar will not keep the one that's selected always highlighted. That is an option in Cocoa. It's just never been implemented in Cappuccino. So because Cappuccino supports categories, it was pretty easy to make a couple line change and get that functionality that we wanted. Line items we went through, related items. This is just an example showing that we used pop-up buttons throughout the application. And again, we were very easily able to customize the look and change the colors just to match our branding. The CP date picker, this has been a huge addition for us. Back when we started this, there was no CP date picker. There was another library called LPKit. LPKit. I could never get it to work right. I could get it to work, but I could never get the look quite right. So for years, we didn't have a calendar. And obviously, that's an important feature in a scheduling application. So now we do. That's been a big benefit. Photo library, this is a collection view, which I believe is built on a table view, or at least was at one point. So we basically use a collection view, and that's how we manage that. And then this is the help that I had already pointed out. Pop-up menus where we're able to have this button on each page. You click the button, it just attaches this popover directly to the button. And we use a web view because that makes it really easy to update the content. This is the payment window, which I wanted to show because it shows that we do use CP windows throughout the application. That's the Cappuccino way of having a native-looking additional window within your application. And then alerts. Somebody had asked previously about how do you display an error. We use CP Alert, which makes it really easy. We basically, in our code that manages interaction with the server, we have one routine that handles all the calls to the server, and it accepts a callback that it's supposed to execute if on success. And on failure, what it does is it can optionally accept a callback, but it also displays whatever error message we returned. If there's so that would be for any kind of an error where the server doesn't have an error, but the code executes correctly, but something that you wanted to happen didn't. For example, you try and delete an inventory item that's on an invoice. The server worked properly, and the way that it worked properly was by saying, I got your request, I'm not going to do that, here's why. Okay, but what if the server drops the connection? What if you get a 500 error? What if any number of other things that happen? We also capture those within the Cappuccino code, and we do a similar thing. If it's an error that we can grok, then we put it on an alert. If we can't, then we just put a generic alert up there that says, please try again. Here's the videos in case the demonstration hadn't worked. We'll skip through that. Sorry, I can't skip that one. It still warms my heart every time I see dragging an item over. Again, because I couldn't believe how easy that was to implement. True story, when I was trying to figure out how to implement that, I was working at the hospital. And in the course of an afternoon, as I was doing patient care and studying all these other things, sort of in the back of my mind the whole time, like, okay, what classes do I need to use, and what are the delegate methods that have to be implemented? And I went home and put it together within a few minutes. because the patterns within Cappuccino are so consistent that once you learn the patterns, once you learn the delegate, data source, kind of different patterns and how the whole system works, it's very consistent. It's very easy to work with. And you also realize very quickly, if you don't know how to do something, you can either look at the Cappuccino docs, which they get knocked a lot online, but they're pretty phenomenal because all of the classes are spelled out, which methods are supported. And if the Cappuccino docs don't tell you, then you can always search Apple's documentation, and most of the time it's going to be spot on in terms of how you do things in Cappuccino. I had already pointed out the menu within the token field that you can use to edit like a contact. We also use another feature of Cappuccino, which is that rows and tables can have an optional menu. And so we do that on both our items and our categories menus to be able to like show a menu to duplicate an item or things like that. CP user defaults we use. We don't store as much information in there as we could, but we do use this to set some of the kind of default values that people can change things and have it stay the same for them from session to session. And then Xcode Cap we use, which has made the process of working with Xcode and Interface Builder so much easier than it used to be. So things we love about Cappuccino. The tool chain is phenomenal. Building interfaces in Xcode provides a lot of power. Xcode Cap takes care of all the details behind the scene. Love it. Rapid prototyping, this is what I mentioned about, I can develop a feature in an hour, and if it doesn't work, okay, it's only an hour lost. And even that process many times would yield something that's beneficial later on. It might be a few months until we come back to it, but a lot of times even just those sessions of prototyping something, even if what I developed doesn't quite fit what we need, the ideas have often proved to be useful later on. I love that it's mostly Cocoa, so we can use the wealth of information from Apple on Cocoa documentation, as well as third-party books on Cocoa. And then it's completely JavaScript, which means you can use any JavaScript library for the most part, JavaScript techniques and so on. How you shouldn't use Cappuccino in your application. So I did very, very, very little development work between about mid-2005 when I quit to go back to school and the creation of RW, which was like fall of 2010. So a lot changes in 5 years. Previously, the vast majority of my recent development work had been in Perl, writing database and web applications and maintenance scripts and all this kind of stuff. Good code, and it's a great system. I love it. But just the ways that people interact with websites, the ways that people develop APIs, the whole idea of able to have a server-side framework that basically handles all the glue code for you, like all of it. This is all stuff that I just kind of missed over. And so I brought some bad habits with me. I didn't have much JavaScript experience at all, very little. I think the only JavaScript I'd really done before was working some minor Ajax stuff for a client that had hired me to update a site that was written in Cold Fusion. And so, Java was like a very small part of a Cold Fusion application. So I made a lot of mistakes, and I had no experience writing a real legitimate GUI application. Everything that I'd done professionally was a lot more of this kind of make a request, not over Ajax, server takes it, processes it, builds a new page and sends it out to you kind of stuff as far as user interface. So I made a lot of mistakes. I basically learned Objective-J by reading Cocoa Programming for Mac OS X on the drive from California to New Hampshire. And then we get to New Hampshire in 5 days, and it was like, okay, today I'm going to start writing the application. And so that was not a good way to do things on the one hand. On the other hand, because of the power of Cappuccino, because of how close it is to Cocoa, even though I had no Cocoa development experience, having read that book was enough that within a month's time, I was able to develop a very workable first version of our application. The interface initially was created using Atlas. Atlas was what first drove me to Cappuccino. This was an interface builder that was written in Cappuccino. The demo looked amazing. in real life it was a little bit more difficult to use than that. And part of that was on me. I didn't know what I was doing with it, and so I couldn't quite figure out what all the different controls meant, and it would crash at times that I wasn't expecting. So that was pretty frustrating. But then I discovered you can actually use Xcode, and I was like, are you kidding me? Here's a full-featured, pretty robust interface builder that I can use, and then there's this great command line utility, nib2sib, that will convert it for me. So I spent a day completely redoing my interface files in Xcode, and I've never looked back. Cappuccino has progressed tremendously since the time that we started. Bindings are much better than they used to be. We don't use bindings much, in large part because they weren't as robust when we started the application, and so that's not how I learned to do things in Cappuccino. As I've rebuilt parts of it, we're moving more things to bindings, but if I could start over from scratch now, I'd spend more time really learning what's the different functionality that Cappuccino provides. LP Kit was another thing. We didn't have calendars previously, so I had to sort of try and figure out how to do that. But now there's a lot more. A lot of the holes that existed 5 years ago, 6 years ago, have been filled in now. It's a much more robust system now, so I'd make different decisions. I mentioned this earlier, but Martin rewrote the compiler. Previously, the compiler was basically a preprocessor that didn't do any real compiling, which was fine, and it worked, except there were some performance trade-offs that went along with that, ways that the JavaScript engines couldn't optimize the resulting JavaScript. Martin, how long did it take you to write the compiler?
I actually did write it twice, but the first time I think I did it in 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had some previous experience doing stuff like that, so that's probably why. And I worked pretty much every hour those 3 days.
Well, thank you for those 3 days, because seriously, the performance of certain parts of Cappuccino was probably about double after he did that work. So that was huge, because it's like, okay, we just got for free. I didn't have to change anything in my code. Now suddenly my application runs faster. My users are happier. Xcode Cap, it makes interfacing with Xcode much easier than it used to be. And then there's cup instead of deep drop upload. If I were going to start over now, I'd use cup because it's kind of better supported. Deep drop upload didn't work with all the browsers. I had to kind of hack some things together to make it work. But now I have this hacked deep drop upload that works well enough, so I don't have any plans to replace it. And then the different parts of my application were too tightly coupled. A lot of this had to do with just not having spent enough time learning the patterns before I dove into a real application. But that's where we are. So what would I do differently? I'd really spend more time learning the tool chain. I'd learn the patterns more thoroughly. I'd try things out. I'd start with a small unrelated application just to learn Cappuccino. Our database that powers our production application is actually called quick_test. Because I started out, I thought I just want to try a couple of ideas out. And 6 years later, it's a well-designed database in spite of the name, but it's like I just never got around to moving from my pre-development work to my actual project. So if I were going to do things all over again, I'd spend some time working on a Cappuccino application that didn't have anything to do with what I was actually trying to build, just to learn the different tools. Many things in Cappuccino can be done more than one way. You can do all of your interface in Xcode. You can do your whole interface in Xcode, but set up your array controllers within your actual code of your application. I would have learned those things and figured out what I was comfortable with and what was productive for me so that I could be consistent. Because, the application works great now, but there are definitely under the hood some inconsistencies. And that has made maintenance a little bit more difficult than it would be if I knew what I was doing in the beginning. And I'd think through server interaction. This is an interesting one, and I've got an example for this. So JavaScript shouldn't have race conditions because it's single-threaded. But JavaScript in the real world isn't typically running just on its own. It's interacting with the outside world. So this was my first version of how I did things in Cappuccino. When I first kind of learned, all about method calls and how to do some of this stuff, I thought, okay, so I'm gonna my save invoice function is gonna save the invoice. So if the response is a success, good, it's readable up there. I'll grab the invoice ID that I'd used, and then I'm going to load the header of the invoice, so all that basic information. And then I'm going to load the invoice line items, and then I'm going to load the payments. Well, this all works great as long as everything happens in the order that you're expecting. But what if I get the first response, and then before all three responses come in, I click on another invoice. Now I've just loaded the header. Now I've said to switch to a new invoice, but I haven't gotten the response yet for my invoice line items. Now my invoice line items request gets responded to from the server, and Cappuccino calls the callback that I've specified in order to redraw the invoice line items, and now I've got the invoice line items from the wrong order. I'm sure nobody in here would make that mistake. I made that mistake way too many times, and it took a lot of times of our initial alpha and beta users saying, hey, I click on an order and I'm like, well, this never happens to me in testing. Well, of course it doesn't, because in testing I've got a database with 3 rows in it, and it's like there's never a performance issue and. In the real world, if anything doesn't happen instantly, these kinds of problems can happen. So fortunately I learned about that, was able to rewrite a lot of that. So here's the less clever, more better version. Same thing, save the invoice, then the response comes back. It says, the invoice was saved successfully. Then I say, okay, let's load the invoice with the invoice ID that I just got back from the response. That works, but it's not really the best way of doing things, I think. So best, and I put a question mark here because I'm definitely open to other options. I realized, okay, a lot of my routines, even my update routines, typically one of the first things I'm going to do in the application after I get an update is call back to the server and load some additional information based on it. So why don't I just return that information that I'm going to need with the update, right? I save a round trip to the server. I eliminate the possibility of having these sort of race conditions where responses come out of order, and I can immediately update the interface with the most current information from the server rather than having to make another call. So for the most part, what I do now is when I make a call, if there's any kind of information that's going to be needed, I just return that, and the callbacks know how to handle that. Anything that updates an invoice, meaning a payment, changing the header, adding a line item, deleting an item, anything like that, all of those actions are going to impact the balance due on the invoice, the total price, all of that stuff. I need that every time, so I always return that, and then my callbacks can know that they're always going to have the most current information. So these are just some sort of different ways of doing things that I learned about from kind of the school of hard knocks, but the application's a lot better now than it used to be. And then finally, I talked about this briefly, but be more consistent. Do the same thing the same way every time. All of my table views should either have a data source class that's the same class, and that kind of thing. I shouldn't have some table views that say data source self and have a function that's written in there that manually calculates the each row, and other table views that have an array controller, and other table views that don't have an array controller but have an array that's actually in another file. Like, these are all the different ways I tried to do things, and there is probably a best way, which is to use an array controller. But again, I didn't know that when I started, and so you look at the very first parts of the application, they're implemented a little bit differently than the more current stuff. So currently, my wife and I are remodeling a house. The house is very new by European standards, but it's very old for California. It was built in 1929. And we've completely gutted it, and we're completely rebuilding it. What's been interesting, though, is that you tear it apart and you see things like, in this picture, anybody have any idea what this is? Electricity. It's called knob and tube. We don't do this anymore, I assume, because it's not safe. But basically, you look inside the walls, and there's these insulating tubes sort of nailed random places in the studs, and then the wire just kind of comes out, and it wraps around them. And at certain points, it's like stripped off, to make a lead out of it or whatever. So that's kind of the old way of doing things. Here's the remodel, all of the new wiring. It's sort of funny in our house because all of the knob and tube is not functional anymore, but we're leaving it there. So it's kind of part of the history of the house. But the point here is, really think through what you're going to do and use a consistent architecture throughout. It'll make your maintenance easier going forward. And there's definitely better ways of doing things than kind of the old ways. Any questions? It does. Yeah, it does. So the way that we used to do this, one of the decisions that we made early on, and I would probably still do this, was in order to separate the tenants in the database, every table has a tenant ID. And the database tables are never accessed directly. They're always accessed through a view, which is based on the currently logged in user. And the users are the tenant ID. And so what that means is that if I'm in Cool Rentals, which is our demo company, I'm not going to ever be able to see Loots data or update Loots data or anything, even if I write my query badly, because all of the queries go through a view that is limited based on who I am and based on that tenant ID. So then the question is, well, how do you make sure you have the right tenant ID? The easiest way is pull it from the whatever URL is being accessed. And so what we used to do is when people would create an account, we'd tell them, here's your URL, and they had to go to that URL every time. That works fine if you're OCD and you know what you're doing. My wife had to explain to me it's not the most user-friendly way for our end users. And so when we did our big rewrite a year ago, we created this agnostic page. We used to have our login was actually in Cappuccino. So you'd go to this URL. We had this pretty ugly, actually, login screen, but it was already at your specific URL. Now we have this agnostic page. It does the login. If you're logged in and authenticated successfully, then we know who you are because you've just logged in, and so we can redirect you to the appropriate URL. Exactly. Yeah. And the other benefit there is that previously people would go to their URL, and even if it's cached, it still takes a few seconds to load because I assume because the actual application has to be parsed and the zip file has to be read and all those objects have to be instantiated and everything. That takes some time. So previously somebody would go to their URL and it's like, okay, waiting, especially if it was their first time, they didn't know how long to wait. If they don't have a good internet connection, it might take 20 seconds the first time to load. And that's not, somebody's just signed up, that's not 20 seconds that you want to spend. If we instead immediately can show them the static HTML page, they log in, boom, they know that something's working. And then we have, I don't know if you saw it, but we've replaced the default Cappuccino load-in icon. We still use the progress bar, but we have a little elephant that's in the same kind of styling as just that sort of outline. So it at least tells people something's working, you've gotten in, that kind of stuff. Any other questions? Yeah.
Curious, do you use Postgres because of the elephant?
No. No, we're on MySQL, which a lot of people knock, but MySQL is not the database that it was 15 years ago. And that's what I was familiar with. And so we actually run on Amazon Aurora, which is their sort of rewrite of MySQL. It's a completely managed product. One of the decisions that I had to make early on, again, this is not my full-time job. I'm a physician. And so, as important as this is, we have real customers using it and everything. If I'm taking care of patients, I can't leave that in order to solve problems here. And so what's been very important to us is to take all of the administration as much as possible out of my hands and put it in the hands of people who are professional administrators, and to put in as much redundancy as we can. So, the amount of infrastructure that we have built out for the size of the application right now is we're way overbuilt, but that's cheap to do with Amazon Web Services, which is what we use. And we're able to have redundancy at every single level and monitoring at every level of the application. So I don't have to worry that I'm going to be at the hospital and something's going to legitimately break and not self-repair. So, yeah, long answer to a short question. Anything else? All right, well, thank you.